the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, the slow accretion of 100% certified organic nanotech produces life on a formerly barren chunk of rock. Raja Papas may seem all-powerful, but harem scarum. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Drake's The Sea Without a Shore. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen editor Tony Daniel. This time we have part 2 of a 2-part interview with Eric Flint and Griffin Barber, talking about the new entry in the Ring of Fire series, 1636 Mission to the Mughals. In this entry in the series, a group of uptimer Grantville residents, that is, people from the modern-day town of Grantville, West Virginia, that got thrown back into the 1630s in Europe, and downtime adventurers arrive in what will be India and try to trade with a fractious Mughal empire for opium and saltpeter. In this part 2 of the interview, Eric and Griffin delve even deeper into the bizarre and fascinating politics and culture of the time. So stay tuned for that, and we also continue with the complete audiobook serialization of The Sea Without a Shore by David Drake. We are closing in on the end of that one, folks. Now here's the news. April mass markets thunder across the start line at Talladega and other places that sell books. By the way, when I was a Boy Scout, I once raised the flag at the Talladega 500, and the thing got stuck halfway up because the pulley was rusted at the top. I literally had to climb the pole using the cord like Batman in the old series in front of 70,000 people until it suddenly came unstuck, and down I came. Also got Richard Petty's autograph at that one. So I know what I'm talking about when I say these are some stock car powerful paperbacks this month. In pole position, we have Silence by Mercedes Lackey and Cody Martin. This is the Serrated Edge series, and it's back. I really like this one that places elves in the modern world and gives them modern problems to deal with. In Silence, teenager Stacy's father has just remarried, and now she finds herself shunted all the way to the rundown and dying Maine town of Silence and into the custody of her yucky alcoholic mother. And it gets worse. Silence seems to be stuck in a proverbial stone age for some reason. We might find out why. There's no cell phone service except at the very top of the bluff outside of town. No internet except dial-up. Ooh. But all is not as it seems in Silence. There are strange things moving beneath the shabby surface, terrible plots in play, and deadly players in a supernatural game afoot. Also at booksellers is Shooting the Rift by Alex Stewart. This is a cool science fiction and space opera with a bang, and it has a humorous edge. Cast out by his family and exiled from the Wimward Commonwealth, Simon Forrester has to make a new life for himself as an apprentice to the powerful Commerce Guild, but others aboard the merchant vessel Stacked Deck have a hidden agenda that might lead directly to interstellar war. Now Simon finds himself forced to choose between old and new loyalties, with the fate of an empire at stake. Silence by Mercedes Lackey and Cody Martin, and Shooting the Rift by Alex Stewart are now roaring across the finish line with checkered flags flying and into the hands of readers at booksellers everywhere. This is part 2 of a 2-part interview with Eric Flint and Griffin Barber talking about their new entry in the Ring of Fire series, 1636 Mission to the Mughals. I want to welcome Eric Flint and Griffin Barber to the podcast. Hello, guys.
Hi. Hey.
Eric Flint is a modern master of alternate history fiction with over 3 million books in print. He's the creator of the multiple New York Times bestselling Ring of Fire series, starting with the first novel, 1632. With David Drake, he's written 6 popular novels in the Belisarius alternate Roman history series, and David Weber collaborated on 1633, 1634, the Baltic War, and the sort of Honorverse sub-series that included latest entry, Cauldron of Ghost. What's the name of that sub-series again, Eric? It suddenly just dropped from my mind. Crown of Slaves, right?
Yeah, there's 3 books in it. There's Crown of Slaves, Torture, Freedom, and the last one was Cauldron of Ghosts.
They're all part of David's Honorverse. He's also co-authored with Reich Spohr, David Carrico, Katie Wentworth, Dave Freer, and many others. Eric's latest solo Ring of Fire novel is 1636, The Audubon Onslaught. He was for many years a labor union activist, and he lives near Chicago, Illinois, over there on the Gary side of things, I believe. Griffin Barber spent his youth in 4 different countries, learning 3 languages and burning all his bridges. Finally settled in Northern California with a day job as a police officer in a major metropolitan department. He lives the good life with his lovely wife, crazy smart daughter, needy dog, and indifferent cat. That's a lot of adjectives. Now at booksellers everywhere is a new addition to the Ring of Fire series, 1636, Mission to the Mughals. All right, tell me how to say it, guys.
Mughals, yeah.
Mughals.
Mughals, yeah.
As Griffin was telling me, it's like we got our term mogul from it. By Eric Flint and Griffin Barber. So tell us about the society. I mean, there are mostly Hindus. They're ruled over by Muslim rulers who are descended from the Genghis Khan and his folks. And there are other sects there, like the Sikhs. What is the mix going on, and how is it sounds like a powder keg to me.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that their system, the way they governed, was that you had the emperor had his court, and the kids were part of that court. But the children, once they reached a certain age, they were released, and they were made to have their own courts. And in those courts, those courts would act as poles to subvert those that were disaffected with the regime, the emperor. They would go to the son and find employment with him. And therefore, when there was a change of emperor, oftentimes there was a change in the kind of the position of the way people lived their lives and that kind of thing, because the governance had changed so radically. But they kept the dissidents in the family by basically setting their sons in opposition to themselves. So it was a really fascinating, that I don't think I have ever seen in all my studies of history. I don't think I've ever seen that anywhere else, in the way that they, basically coldly manipulated people into, there's no choice but us as a family, but there's a lot of choice with us as a family. So, but in the wider context that you're asking about, you have India is at the time is, I believe, at least 90% Hindu. Only the north has been converted, and that lightly. And when you say that the Muslims are ruling, they are and they aren't. They are the ultimate rulers, but they have, especially in the era that we're talking about, and previously, whenever they conquered somebody, they didn't necessarily insist that they convert. So long as they were willing to pay the tax, good on you. We don't care if you want to pay the tax, and so long as you send me your daughters to marry into the family, we're good. So there are huge numbers of Rajputs who were fierce warriors and devastating infantry that were signed in with them. There were also some Rajput that were known for their horseback riding and that kind of thing. And they also have the rise of the Sikh faith. Up until the 6th guru, who took power in the early days of the 17th century, the Sikhs are very peaceable. They're agrarian. They have a very much a turn the other cheek, but they're so beloved by their followers that the Mughals get pretty jealous of them and want to make sure that they're under the Mughal rule. So they keep imprisoning gurus. The 5th guru has been imprisoned and murdered and executed. I think the 3rd and the 4th as well. But the 6th guru is the one who militarized the Sikhs. If you look at the Sikh flag today, you see the flower and then the 2 swords on either side of it. 6th guru is the one who decided that was he was going to wear two swords, Miri and Piri, which are the signs of his power temporal and his power spiritual. And luckily enough, this era that Eric allowed me to write in, I got to play with that. Here's this guy who's militarizing the Sikhs, and that's one of the first things that happens when the Europeans arrive and when the uptoppers arrive in court is there's some stuff going on with the Sikhs, and it's bad news for everybody involved.
There, and Eric had mentioned that Mullah Mohan, he's kind of an Ayatollah kind of dude, right? He's a rabble rouser, and he is in some way allied by the former emperor's widow. Is that correct? Even though he doesn't really know it.
It's we thought of doing a genealogical chart of the Mughals, and we finally decided it just got so complicated we wouldn't do it. She was the what was she? 23rd wife or something, Griff, of
Yes.
of the current emperor Shah Jahan's father, but she was not his mother. So I don't know quite well. How would you describe the relationship? It gets complicated.
Yeah, that was his stepmother and his wife's aunt.
Okay. Well, maybe tell us about the harem and how are women treated? There's a certain rule that they have. It's what is it called? Starts with a P. The
Purdah.
Yeah.
Purdah, yeah.
So, yeah, Purdah is the separation of single women from view of the public and from certainly from men. It's a religious stricture that leads to the burqas that you see that are so emblematic of Middle Eastern culture as far as our women are concerned. The harem, in its expression in India, was interesting because there are veiling rules for the Rajputs who are Hindu, as for their women as well, and they also practiced sati, which is the immolation of themselves after the death of their husband. So there was a lot of already pre-existing situations in India that were not the best for women. And then in the harem, anybody who is affluent enough, you may have multiple wives in Islam, so long as all of those wives are treated equally. One cannot be favored over the others as far as economically. So if you buy one car for a wife, you have to buy two cars, one for each wife or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of situations like that. So the harem at this time is served. It's also a place of power because the women who are associated with the emperor's harem, they have unprecedented amounts of power, even more so and more formal power than in some ways the courts of Europe, the queens and the dowager queens and empresses of Europe, because they had the power of life and death, but they also had strict control over the children of the emperors. They raised them until they were 10. They had to see to their education. So of course, many of these imperial mothers did not nurse the children themselves. So they had foster. The term is escaping me right now, but foster mothers that were responsible for wet nurses. They had wet nurses, and the children of those the children of those wet nurses were also members of that imperial household, and they would become that prince's closest guards because they were they shared the very same milk and they were raised together, etc. But the biggest thing to remember is it is an oppressive system. 99.9% of people that were in these harems were not there they were there regardless of their choice in the matter. So there are some very dark kind of things going on, including the making of eunuchs out of boys, so that they could serve the harem without risking the purity of those women. A bunch of things that are just really hard to swallow from a modern Western perspective as far as how they lived.
One of the things that's come out reading about the Safavids is, and I've already run into this with the Ottomans, when you have harems of the type that these empires had, you get a fascinating. I mean, these women were not powerless by any stretch of the imagination. They just always had to work behind the scenes, and it makes for great storytelling. It really does. It could often get ruthless as hell. Although typically the weapons of choice tended to be more subtle forms of assassination, especially poisoning. But you got the same thing with the Safavids. I mean, exact same kind of dynamic, and they had a different. With them, the ethnic component was much more important because the Iranians, as such, didn't actually dominate the empire initially. They were actually dominated by Turks. Never mind, I'd have to go into it. It had to do with the whole history of the Sufi order that originated them. But then later on, the emperors, in order to play off the Iranians and the Turks, started importing a lot of Georgian people from the Caucasus, Georgians, Circassians, Armenians, and they would often bring them in as women for their harems. And then once those women would have children, they'd start maneuvering to get their children in position. So before, it's really fascinating stuff to work with.
Yeah, the harem stuff was a challenge and a playground. I mean, it really was. There was a lot to dive into and to work through and to figure out how to do these interactions, because the Mughal court was the first time I had seen where, you brought it up earlier, that a daughter's in the harem, and she's running the show in the harem because the favorite wife's dead. There's really not a whole lot of mention of the other wives of Shah Jahan, aside from as parents of these collateral princes that were never as important to Shah Jahan or to the actual succession. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff as Eric was saying, to kind of play around with. And the ethnic makeup of the Mughals, they were very much open to marriage alliances and bringing in people, and as a matter of fact, Shah Jahan, his wife Mumtaz was her parents, her aunt Nur Jahan. They were Persians. They had come into the country as merchants, itinerant merchants with horses and everything. They'd almost lost their lives multiple times in different attacks and things like that. And eventually they rose to prominence in the court of Jahangir. And she was married to another man beforehand. And then Nur Jahan, in any case, was married to another man. And then eventually he was killed in battle. I'm going to put air quotes on in battle, because there's some question as to whether or not Shah Jahan or Jahangir had him killed or not, so that he could be with her. And then when it comes to their controlling their own fates within the harem, whoever was bossing the harem, either the preferred wife or the emperor themselves, or the many administrators that could be running the show. So there was a lot of harem politics that were involved in the original history, and some of it divided along religious lines. There were Shah Jahan's harem included Portuguese women that were taken as prisoners in Hooghly. There were Armenians, a number of other Christians that were taken either as prisoners or sold by their families. And then there were the Rajputs, etc. I mean, it's just an amazing mix of folks that they would bring together in this closed environment, closed world, and they would then start to generate their influence, what influence they could.
One of the interesting things that you have in the book that I did not know about at all was that there were also some female warriors who guarded the harem in this era.
Yeah, I had I did an inordinate amount of research on this, and one of there were three sources that I had that I talked about the female harem guards. The most telling was the historical record of the civil war between Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh. Dara has already lost, more or less, but Shah Jahan is still alive. And Shah Jahan is trying to get them to come to a meeting between, have him be the middleman for a meeting within his harem of Aurangzeb and Shah Jahan. And between Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh. And Dara is like, yeah, sure, I've already lost anyway, so it only does me good to go and sit at Daddy's knee and try and get him to solve this. But Aurangzeb's advisors all tell him, don't do it. Shah Jahan is only looking for an opportunity to set his women warriors on you, and they will kill you. Don't do it. And Aurangzeb, for that, he probably used that as his public reason, but he publicly admitted to concerns over being assassinated in his father's court by women warriors. So I was just like, that I've got to work that in. They had to be such scary women to be able to impress upon this guy who's going to be the emperor for however long, that he'll be murdered by him. I thought that was awesome. So, you have this position where they're being oppressed and it's just, it's really bad, but they also have a place where they rule supreme and where they can maneuver and be full people within that. And I wanted to make sure I reflected that these were real people, full people, not, property.
Yeah.
And part of doing that was being able to look at these warrior women and have them be just kick-ass characters and people.
Yeah. Well, they have their own. They have their own loyalties and alignments as well. Well, we should talk about is Jahara, right? The daughter. Why is she in the harem to begin? She's the daughter of the Shah. I mean, of the emperor. Why is she in the harem? And she sort of runs it, right? She's a major character in the book.
And that's, Jahanara Begum was another historical figure, and she was an incredibly accomplished, a poet, a linguist, just did amazing things throughout her life. She was also very long-lived. But she had, when her mother had passed away, she was the one who held things together. Because Dara's kind of spoiled and concerned with himself and those kind of things. But when Dad goes spirals into a massive depression, she's the one who holds the family together and continues the education of the younger children, and also is a forceful personality and a force for good in as far as her reach goes. She also paid for a huge number of gardens to be instituted, but also for pilgrims to go on the Hajj to Mecca. She funded that. She had trading concerns, which was all kind of typical for the very uppermost echelons of the imperial court women, was that they had access to their own funds and could invest it the way they wished. And she took over her mother's holdings, and she inherited many of her mother's holdings, she and her younger sisters. So she is right at that edge of becoming her own kind of power. But in the historical record, she was never allowed to marry because, I think because for two reasons. Number one, Dad didn't want to see his daughter die as his wife had died. dilute power by giving someone else a claim through a mother's line. Because if you think about it in Islam, that is really the big division between the two major sects of Islam is Sunni and Shia, where the one is tracing the lineage back to Muhammad through the wife of Muhammad. So they did not want to dilute that claim. But I also think there was a personal connection there that he didn't want to forgo.
And his wife died in childbirth.
Yeah.
Giving.
Yes.
And.
Well, when Griff and I discussed this book, I mean, right from the very start, we agreed that Jahanara, in some ways, she's the central character of the whole story. Really, the two most central figures, I think, and certainly more interesting ones, are her and Salim, the Afghan emir. And it was just very obvious to us that she was just a fascinating character, and that it would be crazy not to have her central to the whole story. So that was kind of something we decided on right from the very start. I mean,
our delegation arrives. They travel to the court. What sort of events might this set in motion? What's going to happen, or what might happen? This is something that didn't happen in history, obviously, in our history.
Griff, I'm going to pass that one on to you.
Well, I mean, essentially, this is the story, but we don't want to tell the whole story. But what might be some ramifications of this?
Yeah, we proceeded. There's two things going on. Again, I have that. The uptimers, they seem to, in the other stories, they seem to have a larger impact than, or they have had a larger impact in the mainline series because of where they're from and when they're from. I kind of wanted to go and just kind of go with the whole. If you could shoot Hitler and kill him, would you? That old saw of that kind of argument is kind of turned on a little bit on its side and pushed a little bit out of the way with this one. So if you, as you were the emperor, and you found out that you were imprisoned for 40 years by your third youngest son, the one you don't favor, and that the son you do favor is a failure because of what you did in his upbringing, how do you fix that? So it's much more about the knowledge that they're bringing about themselves, or the outcomes of the decisions they're making or have made, that powers the story and makes the change go on.
Dara, for instance, gets to have his Prince Henry come to Jesus moment and stop being the spoiled guy. It's a great subplot of the book.
And that was one of my hopes was are these people, because to certain sects in India, certain religions in India, Aurangzeb is really on a level with some of the most heinous figures in history because of his insistence on tearing down temples and his just wholesale forced conversions of Hindus and Jains and all of the different religions in that era. He's really viewed as a guy that needs to go down in history as a bad guy. But he's 15 when this book opens. And how did he get there? I thought that was an interesting question that I wanted to explore. So I do. And a lot of it has to do with his great stepmother, and who is also his great aunt, and her interplay with the previous generations, and the whole setup of the Mughal empire and its inheritance system, such as it was. So again, that big question overarching is that, okay, what happens when you find out all these things about what's going on? And then also, when the uptimers show up, there's some debate currently about whether or not the Mughal Empire was the first gunpowder empire. And I kind of was like, yeah, whatever. But I wasn't so much focused on that question as fascinated by the fact that they turned it away. They didn't really care that much about it. Because why? Because they had systems in place to do what they wanted to do. And they were rich beyond reason. There's a reason why, you're called a music mogul or whatever today, is because these guys were just fabulously rich. The Peacock Throne, all these things that they had. So when the uptimers show up with their, hey, we've got a railway system. We can show you how to do this. And it's the guys talking to the emperor, not the midwife / paramedic that's talking. They play up their technical expertise. And the emperor is like, yeah, but I've got a whole class of people who transport goods back and forth in my country. You want to put them out of work? That's not right. I don't want to hear that. And so he kind of poo-poos them and turns them down, which is just completely not the way most of the series goes. Most everybody's like, yes, we can get this modern stuff. And as opposed to them who are, he's again, and he's not really doing it because he's stuck in the mud in his own way. He's doing it for his own reasons. He's the emperor, and he has a caste of people who are the guys who handle shipping. And he's concerned that, you're going to put them out of business. So he immediately kind of, denies them that option. And then events transpire that blow things up even more so. So that we have the sweeping battles and the court going off to war, etc. So I think that's probably got a good little nutshell there of why we did what we did.
Well, was it as with any Ring of Fire novel? There's a good battle that we get to participate in. So the book closes with a pretty big hint there's going to be a sequel. Have y'all got one in the planning stage or beyond?
Yeah. Yeah, we do. The working title is called The Peacock Throne, and Griff's already worked out a rough draft of the plot outline, which we've kicked around. Are you you're working? Remind me where you're at with this, Griff, because I've been working on something else, so I haven't really been staying in touch with you.
I haven't been. I haven't done a whole lot of work on it since that draft that I presented to you, because we had some arguments we were trying to figure out as far as feasibility and also just making sure that we went as hard on the we want to make sure that we're, again, treating everybody with respect, because we're talking about 4 major religions, the oppression of women, stuff like that. We want to make sure we did handle everything with respect. So we're trying to work our way through an outline that's also a fun story. The whole point of this is to tell a romp, but we also want to make sure that I certainly want to make sure that I'm respectful of religions and that kind of thing as we go forward. So it's a bit harder to do the sequel, as usually I think is the case.
Well, Eric? You mentioned you're working on something. What are y'all working on, other than this or along with this?
Me right now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm partly working on this because right now I'm reading a book on the history of the Safavid dynasty in Persia. There were 3 great Muslim powers in this time period: the Ottoman Turks, the Mughal, India, and in between them, the Safavid dynasty ruled Persia. And the Safavids originated as a Sufi sect. They actually had a religious origin, and then after about 200 years, they seized power, and they imposed a very harsh Shia dynasty over Persia, which is kind of unusual because the Mughals were quite tolerant of other religions, and the Ottomans were fairly well also, but the partly because of their origins, the Safavid dynasty was much more rigid. Anyway, it's just kind of interesting reading it. And I just wanted to do it partly because it's spilling over into two different lines of the 1632 series I'm working on. The one I'm mainly working on follows directly from the Ottoman onslaught, and it focuses on the Ottomans, but the Safavids were a major opponent of the Ottomans. So I need to know about them from that point of view, but they're also going to figure quite prominently in the next book.
And Griffin, do you continue to produce short stories in the 1632 universe?
Actually, I haven't been writing much of those. I've had some change-ups at my regular work, so my schedule's been a bit off. I've been pursuing some science fiction writing and also a fantasy novel, all of which are on spec. They're just working on them. And another of Eric's collaborators, Alistair Kimball, has co-authored a novel with him that's I believe it's called Iron Angels.
Yes.
Coming from Baen.
Yeah, we just pitched that.
That's coming out in September.
Yeah, we just pitched it at sales conference.
Now,
Alistair is a FBI guy, right?
Yeah. It's a cross between urban fantasy, kind of a horror story, and a police procedural focused on the FBI because, Alistair is an FBI agent, so I have the benefit of being able to tap into his expertise. And it's actually interesting to me. Police procedurals are very common, but there aren't very many that feature the FBI. It's interesting. They mostly figure local police forces. So I suggest that to Alistair, and he thought it was a nice idea. So that's what we've been working on. He's also doing a series based on the Maltese, the Knights Hospitaller in Malta during this, the time period of the 1632 series. And there are various things that are going to develop out of that. The other things I'm working on right now, I'm finishing up a novel that I'm doing with Dave Freer that's in the Shadow of the Lion series that we've worked on with Misty Lackey. And I've been plotting out the sequel to Ottoman Onslaught. I haven't got it quite plotted out yet, but I need to plot it out because Paul Goodlett and Gord Huff, whom I worked with in the series, they're writing their own story that's going to link with some stories with some novels I'm going to do, one by myself, one with Chuck. So I've got to make sure the time frame all works out properly. And that's pretty much what I've been doing.
Griff, what were you going to say about, and you have some connection with Alistair Kimball, or is that?
Actually, yes. We both met Chuck at the same time and both hit it off, and we met each other at the same time at one of the World Fantasy Conventions. But Alistair and I are plotting right now and outlining a police procedural set in the near future involving an FBI agent and drones and murder and space stations. So,
cool.
Working on that right now in our free time. So hopefully that'll be forthcoming at some point.
Yeah, I love science fiction crossovers with mysteries. Sometimes they don't sell as well. Sometimes they do, but it's possibly my favorite science fiction subgenre. So I wish you well with that. And onward we go. So the book out right now is 1636, Mission to the Mughals by Eric Flint and Griffin Barber. It's now available at booksellers everywhere. Eric and Griffin, thank you very much for being with us.
Our pleasure.
That was part 2 and the conclusion of an interview with Eric Flint and Griffin Barber talking about their new entry in the Ring of Fire series 1636, Mission to the Mughals. You can hear part 1 of the interview on the previous podcast. Now we continue with our complete audiobook serialization of David Drake's The Sea Without a Shore. It seems Cinnabar's chief spy master is a mother also, and her son is determined to search for treasure in the midst of a civil war. Who better to hold the boy's hand and to take the blows directed at him than Captain Daniel Leary, the Republic of Cinnabar Navy's troubleshooter, and his friend, the cyber spy Adele Mundy. The only thing certain in the struggle for control of the mining planet Corsaira is that the rival parties are more dangerous to their own allies than to their opponents. Daniel and Adele face kidnappers, pirates, and a death squad even before they can get to the real business of ending the war on Corsaira and bringing their charge home, maybe along with ancient alien treasure. Now here is the next entry of David Drake's The Sea Without a Shore.
Adele took the data chip from the case which Graves handed her. Setting it in the console's holder, she said, "It will project in the center of the compartment as well as on the two displays, but you'll probably want to manipulate it, Brother Graves. Take the command seat and I'll sit at the back, as I usually do." Instead of seating himself immediately, Graves frowned and said, "I realize this is a very powerful unit, Lady Mundy, but the programming necessary to read this format—" A holographic index of files appeared in the air where Cleveland and Daniel could read it. So could Hogg and Tovera, for that matter, though Adele doubted they had any desire to. She said nothing. "I apologize," Graves said politely. He sat down and brought up a file with a stylus he had drawn from his pocket. Adele said nothing, but she appreciated the simplicity of Graves' apology. The image meant nothing to Adele. It might have been a close-up of luncheon spread, an inadverted arch of basically pinkish color with overlayers and inclusions of contrasting colors, generally shades of pastel green. Near the bottom of the U was a black speck. Below was a layer of sullen crimson. "This is a cross-section of Pearl Valley," Graves said. "The pink is mudstone laid down 30,000 years ago. The underlayer is granite, and there are blocks of harder rock which were engulfed as the mudstone formed when the valley was part of a lake bed." Cleveland nodded. Daniel didn't react, but Adele assumed he understood as clearly as even she did. "The item Brother Cleveland noticed is here," Graves said, circling the black dot and then expanding it to fill the image area. "I suspect the original surveyors ignored it because it was too small to be of significance. They were looking for copper ore, after all." "That isn't a natural occurrence," Daniel said. "It has shape. No crystal could look like that." "It has shape," Graves said. Adele heard an unexpectedly grim tone in his voice. "And it's hollow, which we can see because one end is open and there are holes in some of the facets." He switched to another image, this one a schematic of pale blue lines. The image rotated slowly. The shape was irregular, something like a drinking tumbler which had been squeezed in the middle and whose sides were pleated. Besides the open top, holes shaped like twisted teardrops pierced the sides in several places. The bottom, though concave, was solid. "It isn't a container of jewels," Cleveland said, "but it's something. And somebody, Captain Pearl or somebody, buried it there." "Pearl Valley's mudstone would be very easy to bore through or trench," Graves said, returning to the image of the object in its matrix. He reduced the scale slightly. "It couldn't be disturbed without leaving evidence of the disturbance, however. Not when I've examined the site with equipment as sensitive as what I've been using." He grinned and turned toward Daniel. Adele watched his face, now in profile, as an inset on her display. "You may be too polite to ask whether I could have made a mistake, Captain," Graves said. "Yes, of course I could, though these images don't require very subtle analysis. I asked 2 other engineers to look over the scans. They aren't members of our community, but I trust them personally and professionally. They came to the same conclusions that I did." Graves shrugged. "The mudstone appears to have formed over the object," he said. "If it's an artifact, it isn't a human artifact, and it certainly isn't something that Captain Pearl buried." Adele had a great deal of experience in sharpening fuzzy images, but these had not been manipulated. She was looking at raw data as it came from the surveying equipment, and they were razor sharp even at the highest magnification. "Brother Graves," she said, "what is the object made of? It would appear to be very dense." "Yes, Lady Mundy," Graves said, turning toward her with a troubled expression. Adele had inset real-time images of the 3 other principals on his display, but Graves seemed to be trying to look through the holographic screen to see her directly. It's almost impossibly dense. Granted that our scans have a degree of error and that gravity plotting is suggestive rather than solid proof. He shrugged again. My colleagues and I believe that the artifact is made from a stable transuranic element. Graves said. Element 126, presumably, though the element's existence is merely a prediction and it has no name. Well, unbihexium, but that's a placeholder unless and until the element itself is discovered, which we apparently have just done. Then it's valuable after all, Cleveland said. He too looked worried. Even though it isn't a case of jewels. I suppose you could say that the artifact is of incalculable value, Graves agreed. There isn't a market for such a thing because it would be unique in human experience, but it's certainly valuable. I don't see any sign of an antenna, a wire, or a spike on the end, Daniel said. I thought it might be a sort of cavity resonator, trapping signals and re-emitting them on a different wavelength. What sort of signals, Captain? Adele said. I didn't make a detailed search of Pearl Valley, but I think my equipment would have noticed anything that didn't fit standard parameters. I don't know, Daniel said. He grinned engagingly. Nothing electronic, then, not if you didn't pick it up. He looked from Graves to Cleveland, then said as if idly, You believe Pearl Valley is a good place to live, Master Cleveland? For that matter, I like the atmosphere myself, though I'm probably not a good example. I generally like places. Yes, that's so, Cleveland said, obviously puzzled at the change of subject. About the valley, certainly. And I'm glad to hear that you're a happy man, sir. Pretty generally, yes, Daniel said, still grinning. What do you suppose feelings look like? And how would you transmit them? There's no evidence, Graves said. He let his words trail off, perhaps because he had thought further and had realized that there was no objective evidence on any part of the matter. The healthful, welcoming nature of the transformationist community was wholly subjective. Since we don't appear to need weapons anymore, thank goodness, Cleveland said. Then we don't need the money we were going to buy weapons with, do we, Brother Graves? I don't accept the connection between the artifact and our faith, Graves said. I'm confident that if we drill down and bring the object to the surface, which we could do very easily, it will have no adverse effect on Pearl Valley or the transformationist community. He shook his head slowly and continued. But no, I don't see that the community has a serious need for money. Many of those who join us do so after successful careers in the wider world, and the members who guide our investments are quite skilled. Then I suggest, Cleveland began. His face changed, and he straightened on his seat. Captain Leary, he said in a formal tone, forgive me for forgetting that you and my mother are each due 1/3 of any treasure which the expedition finds. And it appears that we have found a treasure. If my sister were here, Daniel said, she might have an opinion on the matter. But she isn't here, and I'm not in the business of money. He shrugged and said, No treasure has been recovered. You owe me absolutely nothing, and I'm confident that Mistress Sand would say the same. Not that it matters, because she isn't here any more than Deirdre is. Daniel looked at Adele and raised an eyebrow. Do you have anything to add, Lady Mundy? He asked. You had some business of your own to transact on Corsaira, I believe. I've accomplished everything I came to do, Adele said, in a neater fashion than either Deirdre Leary or Mistress Sand can have imagined that I would. Neater than I imagined myself. Then I think we're done with necessary business, Daniel said, nodding. However, he looked around the compartment. His grin was just short of splitting his face. Although it doesn't matter to anybody, and therefore nobody can be disappointed, I do have an idea as to where Captain Pearl hid whatever it was he brought from Bay. Anybody else interested in seeing if I'm right? He's really a little boy, Adele thought. Then, may he never change. Cleveland stood up, grinning back at Daniel. I may have found peace and enlightenment, he said, but I haven't lost my sense of curiosity. I certainly would like to learn. And I, said Graves, rising also. Hog, said Daniel, getting to his feet. You usually carry fishing lures, don't you? "Aye," said Hogg, "and I've got a shotgun if you'd like to try the local game besides." "Just the lure," said Daniel. "We're going fishing for treasure."
That was another entry in our complete audiobook serialization of The Sea Without a Shore by David Drake. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And the production cycle of a steel mill in Gary, Indiana turned into 20,000 commemorative manhole covers and sink basins, and the Baen headquarters skyscraper lit in blue and red for one entire month to honor Eric Flint, that would be the red, and Griffin Barber, that would be the blue, authors of 1636 Mission to the Mughals, new entry in the Ring of Fire series. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.